Hey guys, it's Cynthia the Fishing Mommy, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I went from knowing absolutely nothing about electrical connections or electrical work or boat rewiring to being able to plan out a rewire of my 1984 Grady White overnighter and actually rewire it all by myself. So that's what the point of this video is, and I hope you'll stick with me through it. It's got a lot of insights and some tips and tricks that I learned along the way, and hopefully everything is going to go smoothly as I'm still in the process of doing this rewiring. But I'm kind of stopping here in the middle to give you guys what I have done so far. The first thing I did when I bought the boat is really try to get acquainted with everything that was already there. Take an assessment of what you have. What I found out was that I have one battery, not two. It is a Series 29 deep cycle battery, so it's ideal for using as the house battery, not really ideal for a starting battery if you have a two battery system. I'll get into that a little bit later, what I learned about that. The other thing that I noticed though that was kind of cool was that there's a brand new switch. So a battery switch in a boat switches your power draw from either battery number 1, battery number 2, or both, or off. In the case of my switch, I have 4 settings, and those are the 4 settings. So I only have one battery, so how I use it obviously is either off or battery number 1. But it was great that the switch was already there and wired in. The previous owner is the second owner of this boat, and he only had it for a really short time. He had planned to do some upgrades to the boat, and so the new battery and the switch were 2 of the upgrades that he had done. The other thing that he had done was install new navigation lights, which was nice, and new courtesy lights on the boat as well. So those exist, and that's great. Everything else, though, I found as I was surveying what was already on the boat, everything else was wired really badly and largely unsafely and needs to be replaced. All of the electrical in my boat was behind a little wall, and the wall had a little box on it. So I took the box off first. I tried to install a new cabin light, and I got that done, but in the process I took a look at the other wiring and was like, oh my God, I'm actually going to have to rewire this. All of the wiring was a rat's nest. It was all really unsafe looking. If you've seen my previous video, I'll put it up here. I'll link it up here. You'll know that the wiring was really unsafe and just not done correctly at all. Absolutely needed to be redone. Now, because I don't know anything about wiring, or I didn't know anything about wiring, the first thing I did was start watching YouTube videos, how to rewire a boat. And some of them were really, really helpful. Some of them were way too complicated, and they assumed you had a lot of knowledge that you probably don't have if you're looking up such a basic search term. I had almost no knowledge of electrical work at all, other than the basic, how does a circuit work and what's an electron? And so I really had a lot to learn. I'm actually going to put here on the screen a few of the videos that I thought were the most helpful as I was trying to go through the very basics of learning about how to wire a boat system. Another thing that I found was super helpful was this book, the 12-Volt Bible for Boats, and it is incredibly, incredibly helpful. It does start with what's an electron. Some of the early parts of the book read kind of like a textbook. They might not be all that interesting, but they are necessary to understand those pieces of what's happening so that when you go to design and create your system, you're doing it correctly. So I definitely recommend that book. Go check it out. Pick yourself up a copy. You will not regret it. Even if you already know some stuff about how to do basic wiring, I think you might actually really enjoy this book. So I strongly recommend that one. The next thing I did was I discovered some videos and a website by a company called Rewire Marine. So this company called Rewire Marine actually makes custom switch panels. I have ordered mine from them, and I'm waiting for it to come in actually. And so that's one of the reasons I'm not completely done with my project, is because I'm waiting for the switch panel to actually come in so that I can wire everything just once instead of having to do it and then undo it. Some of the things that I've learned from Rewire's content are incredibly helpful. Like they show these really crystal clear diagrams that go step by step into, you know, how to think about your system, how to sketch it out, what components need to go where, what needs to go on a separate fused circuit of its own. For instance, a bilge pump needs to be wired separately, even though you do probably have a switch on your switch panel that says bilge. You want that to be its own circuit and have its own fuse. Now, in my case, my switch panel, I opted for circuit breakers instead of a separate fuse box for my boat. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them was pretty straightforward. That's what's there right now. And even though it's janky and it doesn't really work, I liked the simplicity of being able to reset a popped circuit right from the helm. Of course, every situation is different. Every boater is different, and so if a fuse box works better for you, those are very easy and convenient as well with those new blade fuses. So, you know, you can't really go wrong. But in my case, I chose to have integrated circuits right on the fuse panel. So I'm really looking forward to that coming in. So, okay, I've done a lot of information gathering to this point, and I'm starting to feel like I kind of understand what's going on here. The next step that I took was making a list of all of the things that I wanted to power. And of course, that's the things that you definitely need, like your bilge pump and, you know, your navigation lights, your courtesy lights, your VHF radio, your stereo system, all of those things. And I made a list of them, and then I started the process of figuring out how much voltage each one of them pulls. And this is important. You shouldn't really guess at it. Some of them will surprise you, like a AM/FM stereo pulls a lot more voltage than you would think it would. Whereas cabin lights or LED lights, even navigation lights, really only pull about 1 amp hour, maybe 2. Once you make your list of all of the devices that you want to power and how many amp hours they pull, the next thing to think about is the acceptable amount of current drop that your appliance is required to have based on the run or the length of the wiring. Now, hopefully that sentence makes sense to you, but to make it as simple as I can, when you send voltage down a wire, a length of wire, the signal or the voltage that's going through is going to be more at the beginning of the run and less at the end of the run. And the voltage drop on a mission critical item like a bilge pump or like navigation lights or like a VHF marine radio, the acceptable voltage drop there, because these are mission critical and they are imperative for your safety, the acceptable drop is only 3%. Whereas the acceptable drop for something like an FM stereo or other sorts of optional types of items on your boat, the acceptable drop is 10% over the course of your run. And there are charts out there that will tell you what the voltage drop will be for a specific length of run. Now, if you have a long run to get to a mission critical item, then what you need to do is go up in wire gauge to a thicker wire, because that will carry more current. It's going to be a better conductor and you'll lose less voltage along the length of the run. So determining which of my appliances were going to be 3%ers and which were going to be 10%ers was actually really important. And that helped me determine the gauge of the wire that I needed to choose for each one of my items. Now that I understood the gauges of wire and I understood what all of my items were, I actually made a sketch of the shape of a boat, and I sketched in where my batteries would sit, where my switch is, where my engine is, obviously, and then where the actual appliances were. So obviously the nav lights are all the way at the bow of the boat, and the bilge pump is all the way at the stern of the boat, and other things are located basically at the helm, and things like that. And so this sketch was really, really helpful for me to visualize the lengths of runs and things like that. And then right after I made that sketch, probably a couple of days later, I was talking to one of my friends about it, and they said, hey, you should look at your owner's manual for the boat. Now, obviously, a printed owner's manual did not survive 37 years with my boat, but Grady White is a great manufacturer, and they actually make the manuals available on their website, and you can download them for free. And so that is what I did. I downloaded the original manual for my boat, and there's a wiring diagram in it, which is really very cool. It showed me the existence of a junction box, which I had seen and I really wasn't sure what it was. And it also kind of made me feel good that it corresponded very closely to what I had sketched out as well. I'm going to put those pictures here in the video for you to take a look at how lucky I got, I guess. And it was good affirmation that I understood what I was doing. So now here I was armed with knowing all of the things that I wanted to wire into my boat, having an understanding of what gauge wire that I would need for each one, and I also measured out, of course, the runs, the length of the run from the actual switch panel to the item. And in the case of the bilge pump, it would be from the switch to the item, etc. Anything that has to be direct wired, I would measure from the switch to the item. Anything that had to go from the switch panel that's mounted at the helm, I would measure that distance. And don't forget, as you're measuring distance, don't forget to measure there and back again, because you have to make a complete circuit. And so you're definitely going to need to think about the quantities of wire, and you can save money by really understanding the quantities of wire that you need and only ordering what you need. Now, speaking of the quantities of wire, I mentioned earlier that there are some charts that show the gauges of wire. They're super helpful. One of the other things that I found in my manual was actually the original wire gauges and colors that Grady White had used when they built my boat originally. Interestingly enough, pretty much all of those weird colors are still in there, and so that's helpful because I can see what goes to what, but it's less helpful because I already cut the wires. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I noticed that the smallest gauge wire that they used anywhere in the boat was 16 AWG. And I have since come to understand that really under no circumstances should anybody be using anything smaller than 16 gauge wire in a boat. It's just not considered safe. And, it really only costs a few bucks to get the better stuff. On the note about wire, also, make sure that you are using marine grade tinned copper wire. And what that means is that when you take the sheathing off the wire, you're going to see that it looks silver instead of copper. That's because each copper strand has actually been coated with tin. And then when it's insulated, the insulation is significantly thicker than, like, for instance, automotive primary wire will be. This is going to give you much better protection against corrosion. And speaking of protection against corrosion, it is also super, super important to understand how to make the best connections possible when you're wiring your boat. And I'm going to say right now, if you're thinking about using those little caps that screw on, don't do it. They are not going to be watertight, and boats are wet. Use self-soldering heat shrink caps anywhere you need to make a junction. These are so easy to use. You don't have to use a soldering gun. You don't have to deal with any specialized tools at all. A heat gun is preferred, but you could use like a barbecue lighter if you really needed to. I personally would recommend, if you're doing a rewiring project, go ahead and spend the 28 bucks to get an inexpensive heat gun. You'll find lots of other uses for it, including, by the way, I know that a lot of people use these heat guns to take off the vinyl decals on their boat. Stay tuned, because I'll probably be doing that at some point in the future as well. I went ahead and got an inexpensive heat gun so that I could confidently use the soldering heat shrink connectors. Not the crimping kind, the soldering kind, because you really want those connections tight, and you're going to want to test them and do the pull test with them once you have actually made the connection. So be sure that you have watched a couple videos on exactly how to use those as well. It is worth taking 10, 20, 30 minutes and just refreshing your skills or refreshing your knowledge if you already know, and doing this right so you don't have to do it again in the future. The last facet of the planning stage for me was making my materials list. And it is a big list because it's kind of complicated. I am rewiring almost everything in my whole boat. So I ended up needing 3 or 4 gauges worth of wire. I ended up needing a lot of different kinds of connectors that I didn't already have. Like I said, I did also purchase the little heat gun, and I also purchased a starting battery. Now, I haven't talked a whole lot about the battery situation, but to make sure that if you're wiring a 2 battery system, that you understand the differences between a starting battery and a house battery. The starting battery is what it sounds like. It is tied directly to your motor, and it gives a big amount of current to start up the boat. And then you switch over to your second battery, and that's the house battery, which will power all of your other items while you're underway. That is a deep cycle battery, and deep cycle batteries are designed not so much for a big push at the start, but they are designed to discharge and then recharge many times. So that's why it's called a deep cycle battery. You can run them really far down and then recharge them back up without fear of messing them up. Understand the differences between these 2 batteries. I now have a marine starting battery and a deep cycle battery. They are 2 different sizes. My starting battery is a 24 and my deep cycle battery is a 29. That's the one that was already in the boat. So that was something I needed to buy, though, was that starting battery. So that was about $125. Then I bought battery boxes for both of my batteries. This is something that's important to keep your battery up off of water in the bilge and keep your connections less likely to corrode, etc. It will also keep the battery from tipping over in the instance of something happening that you don't want to happen. So battery boxes are a great investment. They're very inexpensive, and I definitely recommend them for safety. Something else that I put on my list but I considered optional is a shore charging kit. I have not yet purchased this. It's sort of sketched into my plans but not fully. So I haven't really decided if I'm going to add this or not. It adds a few $100s to my build cost, and I'm going to be spending about between $1,000 and $1,100 on this rewiring project. And to be honest with you, I hadn't budgeted for that. So I'm not really sure if I'm going to be buying the NocoGenius system right away or not. We'll have to see what happens with that. This was an unplanned expense, definitely. I didn't think the wiring was in such bad condition when I bought the boat. So the materials list was my last step before actually starting to run some wires. I have not gotten up to that point yet. Right now, I have completed all of my planning stages. I have completed acquiring all of my materials except for my switch panel. When my switch panel and my negative bus bar and my terminal block actually arrive from Rewire Marine, then I will have everything I need to get started actually rewiring, and I will be filming a part 3 at that point, and maybe a part 4 actually. We'll see if I can fit all that in one video. But I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope that these takeaways were useful. I'm actually going to put in the description sort of a bulleted list of all of the takeaways from this video. So, if you want that, if that would be helpful for you, just as a reminder, go ahead and grab that, copy and paste it. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them. Please leave them down in the description. Please do not forget to hit subscribe. And every subscriber helps, and it really makes a big difference to a small creator like myself. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you later.